My photo taste is the Pinterest because they are the best.
Visit our website.
News review from BBC Learning English. Hello and welcome to News Review, the programme where we show you how to use the language from the latest news stories in your everyday English. Hi, I'm Neil. Joining me is Catherine. Hello, Catherine.
Hello, Neil.
What's the story you found for us?
Today's story, Neil, is about the ceremony which will make Donald Trump into the world's most powerful person.
OK, well, let's find out some more about this from this BBC World Service News Bulletin.
The number of Democrat members of the US Congress who said they'll boycott Donald Trump's inauguration as president on Friday has risen to 26. It follows Mr. Trump's attack on the Democrat Congressman John Lewis, who said he would not attend the ceremony because Mr. Trump wasn't a legitimate president.
So, a story about the inauguration of Donald Trump. An inauguration is a ceremony that will make him the official president of the United States. Now, a growing number of Democratic members of the US Congress are refusing to attend the ceremony, and they're saying that their refusal is because Mr. Trump was insulting towards one of their members.
OK, well, you've been looking at this story across the news media, and what are the words that you have picked out that people are using to talk about it?
OK, so we've got three really interesting words today. The first one is boycott, then we have legitimate, and finally swell.
Boycott, legitimate, and swell. So let's start with boycott.
Yep, so the Washington Post tells us the Trump transition, dozens of Democratic lawmakers to boycott inauguration. Boycott.
And here in this sense, boycott, to refuse to take part in something as a protest. But it has a wider meaning. Well, let's stick to start with the refusal to take part in something.
Yeah, if you boycott an event, you refuse to join in with it. And this can happen on a personal level, but most often you'll see it done in a kind of organisational level. So in this case, a lot of people are refusing to go to the inauguration. They're boycotting it. You can have countries that refuse to send teams to sporting events. So, for example, during the apartheid years in South Africa, a lot of sport teams wouldn't go to play in South Africa. So the England rugby team, for example, they wouldn't play in South Africa as a protest against the system of apartheid. So they boycotted the rugby games.
Yep.
It was a boycott.
Yeah, and so that is connected to attendance or taking part in something. Also used equally to talk about buying things or not buying things.
Yeah, not buying things, in fact. So you can have countries that boycott produce from other countries, or you can do it on a personal level. So I'm doing a boycott right now.
Yeah, you got into a fight with your fishmonger.
Well, I wouldn't say a fight, but he was very impolite to me.
Yeah.
And he was so rude, in fact, I've decided that I will not buy anything from his shop again. I am boycotting my local fishmonger as a protest against his lack of common politeness.
Okay, so that's an example of a personal boycott on a sort of a personal level rather than officially organised.
Yes.
And that word can be used up there and down there.
Yes, anything. Refusing to buy, refusing to participate is a boycott.
Yeah, interesting note about this word. It comes from a person's name.
Yes, Captain Boycott.
Captain Boycott. Well, it's a complicated story from Irish history, which we won't go into, but people refused to do something connected to Captain Boycott, and therefore his name came to mean the action of refusing to take part in something or buy something.
That's right.
Okay, your next word.
Next word, we're looking at the Chicago Tribune. The headline says that some Democrats are criticising John Lewis's legitimate jab at Trump. That means it worked. And jab there means attack.
Yeah, so legitimate in this case meaning allowed by law. A very literal meaning.
Yes, absolutely. And a good tip is the words L-E-G at the beginning of a word often has a relationship with the law. So from legal, legislate, and here legitimate. If something's legitimate, the law says it's okay.
Yeah, so John Lewis, this Democratic member of Congress, is suggesting that Trump isn't the legitimate, or won't be a legitimate president because he feels that this business with the Russian hacking means that he isn't the right person to take up this position.
Yes.
But it can also be widened out, this term, legitimate, meaning, in a more general sense, fair, reasonable, acceptable.
Yeah, it doesn't always have a strictly legal sense. If something is just okay, it's all right, there's no problems with it, it's legitimate.
Yeah. Now, I've got a bit of a problem, haven't I?
Your lateness, Neil, I know. It's happening too much.
Yeah, I've been late a couple of times recently.
Yes.
Yeah. And the first time, I had an excuse for both.
Was it a legitimate excuse, though?
Well, let's see. So the first time, I was on the London Underground transport system. The train broke down. I'm underground. There's no way of informing anyone. So I arrived late.
Right.
Yeah. And the boss said, okay, that's a legitimate reason.
Okay, it was out of your control.
Yeah.
It was a good reason. You tried everything. Couldn't be helped. Legitimate reason.
Yeah, meaning acceptable.
And the second time?
Well, I'm addicted to Scandinavian dramas, and
Are you really?
and I stayed up till about 4:30 in the morning watching episode after episode.
Right.
So I missed my alarm, and I came in late.
And what did the boss say?
He didn't think that was acceptable or fair. He didn't think that was a legitimate reason for being late.
I think I would agree with your boss about that. Neil, get yourself to bed early.
Yeah.
My photo taste is the Pinterest because they are the best. Flick to link, a link to flick.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in a 1968 speech where he reflects upon the civil rights movement, states, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." As a teacher, I've internalized this message. Every day all around us, we see the consequences of silence manifest themselves in the form of discrimination, violence, genocide, and war. In the classroom, I challenge my students to explore the silences in their own lives through poetry. We work together to fill those spaces, to recognize them, to name them, to understand that they don't have to be sources of shame. In an effort to create a culture within my classroom where students feel safe sharing the intimacies of their own silences, I have 4 core principles posted on the board that sits in the front of my class, which every student signs at the beginning of the year. Read critically, write consciously, speak clearly, tell your truth. I find myself thinking a lot about that last point, tell your truth. And I realized that if I was going to ask my students to speak up, I was going to have to tell my truth and be honest with them about the times where I failed to do so. So I tell them that growing up as a kid in a Catholic family in New Orleans, during Lent, I was always taught that the most meaningful thing one could do was to give something up. Sacrifice something you typically indulge in to prove to God you understand His sanctity. I've given up soda, McDonald's, French fries, French kisses, and everything in between. But one year, I gave up speaking. Figured the most valuable thing I could sacrifice was my own voice, but it was like I hadn't realized that I had given that up a long time ago. I had spent so much of my life telling people the things they wanted to hear instead of the things they needed to. Told myself I wasn't meant to be anyone's conscience because I still had to figure out being my own, so sometimes I just wouldn't say anything. Appeasing ignorance with my silence, unaware that validation doesn't need words to endorse its existence. When Christian was beat up for being gay, I put my hands in my pocket and walked with my head down as if I didn't even notice. Couldn't use my locker for weeks because the bolt on the lock reminded me of the one I had put on my lips when the homeless man on the corner looked at me with eyes up, merely searching for an affirmation that he was worth seeing. I was more concerned with touching the screen of my Apple than actually feeding him one. When the woman at the fundraising gala said, "I'm so proud of you. It must be so hard teaching those poor, unintelligent kids," I bit my lip because apparently we needed her money more than my students needed their dignity. We spend so much time listening to the things people are saying that we rarely pay attention to the things they don't. Silence is the residue of fear. It is feeling your flaws gut-wrench guillotine your tongue. It is the air retreating from your chest because it doesn't feel safe in your lungs. Silence is Rwandan genocide. Silence is Katrina. It is what you hear when there aren't enough body bags left. It is the sound after the noose is already tied. It is charring. It is chains. It is privilege. It is pain. There is no time to pick your battles when your battles have already picked you. I will not let silence wrap itself around my indecision. I will tell Christian that he is a lion, a sanctuary of bravery and brilliance. I will ask that homeless man what his name is and how his day was, because sometimes all people want to be is human. I will tell that woman that my students can talk about transcendentalism like their last name was Thoreau, and just because you watch one episode of The Wire doesn't mean you know anything about my kids. So this year, instead of giving something up, I will live every day as if there were a microphone tucked under my tongue, a stage on the underside of my inhibition. Because who has to have a soapbox when all you've ever needed is your voice? Thank you.
Presentation I give to high school students cut down to 3 minutes. And it all started one day on a plane on my way to TED 7 years ago. And in the seat next to me was a high school student, a teenager, and she came from a really poor family. And she wanted to make something of her life. And she asked me a simple little question. She said, "What leads to success?" And I felt really badly because I couldn't give her a good answer. So I get off the plane and I come to TED. And I think, geez, I'm in the middle of a room of successful people. So why don't I ask them what helped them succeed and pass it on to kids? So here we are, 7 years, 500 interviews later, and I'm going to tell you what really leads to success and makes Tedsters tick. And the first thing is passion. Freeman Thomas says, "I'm driven by my passion." Tedsters do it for love, they don't do it for money. Carol Coletta says, "I would pay someone to do what I do." And the interesting thing is, if you do it for love, the money comes anyway. Work. Rupert Murdoch said to me, "It's all hard work. Nothing comes easily, but I have a lot of fun." Did he say fun, Rupert? Yes. Tedsters do have fun working, and they work hard. I figure they're not workaholics, they're workaholics. Good. Alex Garden says, "To be successful, put your nose down in something and get damn good at it." There's no magic, it's practice, practice, practice. And it's focus. Norman Jewison said to me, "I think it all has to do with focusing yourself on one thing." And push. David Gallo says, "Push yourself. Physically, mentally, you've got to push, push, push. You got to push through shyness and self-doubt." Goldie Hawn says, "I always had self-doubts. I wasn't good enough, I wasn't smart enough, I didn't think I'd make it." Now, it's not always easy to push yourself, and that's why they invented mothers. Frank Gehry said to me, "My mother pushed me." Serve. Sherwin Newland says, "It was a privilege to serve as a doctor." Now, a lot of kids tell me they want to be millionaires, and the first thing I say to them is, okay, well, you can't serve yourself. You got to serve others something of value, because that's the way people really get rich. Ideas. Tedster Bill Gates says, I had an idea. Founding the first microcomputer software company. I'd say it was a pretty good idea. And there's no magic to creativity and coming up with ideas. It's just doing some very simple things. And I give lots of evidence. Persist. Joe Kraus says persistence is the number one reason for our success. You got to persist through failure. You got to persist through crap, which of course means criticism, rejection, assholes, and pressure. So the answer to this question is simple. Pay $4,000 and come to TED. Or failing that, do the 8 things, and trust me, these are the big 8 things that lead to success. Thank you, Tedsters, for all your interviews.
Flick to link, a link to flick. My photo taste is the Pinterest because they are the best.
Visit our website. News review from BBC Learning English. Hello and welcome to News Review, the programme where we show you how to use the language from the latest news stories in your everyday English. Hi, I'm Neil. Joining me is Catherine. Hello, Catherine.
Hello, Neil.
What's the story you found for us?
Today's story, Neil, is about the